Welcome to episode 6 of our CPO conversation series. And this week we're joined by Davies, veteran CPO from BA, M&S, John Lewis and Deliveroo. And that's a great selection of British institutions. Hi, Rog.
Hi, Rich. Well, thanks for that. I have to be honest, I wasn't CPO at British Airways, though I was part of a great leadership team. And as always, thanks for calling me a veteran.
Great. So let's get straight into the questions. Why procurement?
Well, I have to be very thankful to a chap called Terry Mole. And Terry was a manager of Harlow, Marks and Spencer's.
Oh, wow.
And I was sponsored by M&S through uni. And I had a 6-month placement at Harlow Management Store doing a commercial management trainee job, believe it or not, in charge of things like ladies' lingerie and the likes. And at the end of it, Terry kindly said, yes, we do want you and we will sponsor you, but you're not right for stores, which was a bit of a, oh, okay. And he said, what I really recommend you get into is buying. And I'd never thought about that at all. And he basically said, buying will give you the breadth that someone like you will want. It will give you a set of variability that someone like you will want. And to be honest, Rod, you'll probably get a bit bored with the store management piece.
Yeah.
You need to be a bit more disciplined than you are, which was telling, I guess. So I actually came out of university genuinely being someone looking for a procurement job.
Yeah.
And I was desperate to look at graduate schemes. And I was very fortunate enough to get onto the British Airways graduate scheme, which is a very specific procurement scheme. And it was brilliant. It dragged me all over the place. I got a huge amount of varied experiences.
Yeah.
Got to buy everything you can possibly imagine that an airline buys, right through from aircraft seats to video systems to catering to marketing, and towards the end doing deals with airports and dealing closely with the airport air traffic control companies and the likes. And at the same time also BA were very, very focused on your educational development. So right from day one they got you doing SIPs, and that was done within a couple of years. And then throughout my time at BA I was fortunate enough to be put through program management courses and get qualified as a program manager. I was fortunate enough to be sponsored through a sustainability course with Cambridge University, and BA had that sort of onward development desire, which probably made me the way I am and the way I think about development for individuals in my teams. And also the other part of what BA did was there wasn't a defined difference between direct and indirect, or a real focus on having to be a category specialist. So that's always set my expectations about procurement people should be able to buy anything. And I know there are expertise areas, particularly in tech and marketing and the likes, but I sort of fundamentally we should be strong enough to be able to understand those areas and bring commercial wisdom. Yeah,
definitely. I agree with that. And what do you dislike about procurement?
Currently,
you've got quite a long list there.
I just turn a page and about on the third page. No, I think what I dislike about procurement is the way it's become a function that is so process orientated. And the completion of templates. I know you'll probably say I was guilty of making folks fill in templates at M&S when we were together, but it became the thing, you know. And some of the softer skills became less focused on, and it seemed to become more important to follow a defined set of processes and templates than actually bringing the creativity and interest to the role. And then linked with that, a real focus on tactical deal making, rather than building really strong supply-based management and supplier relationship management. I know that's not true in all organisations by any means, but my feeling has been that has been a slip in procurement terms from where we were. And I guess the other dislike is, and it sort of links to the last point, is the focus on pure savings. We've been really guilty as a function. I know I've battered on about this for years, of feeling that we've had to justify ourselves by reporting savings, and often those savings aren't believed by the finance people we try and take them through. And I always think to myself, it's interesting, no one measures legal by the number of contracts they do. No. So why have we found ourselves in that sort of place? And if there's one thing I would change about procurement most fundamentally, it'd probably be that.
Yeah, I think it leads to people recognising procurement for the wrong things, doesn't it? So you sort of, anytime there's any sort of issue, it's like, right, we'll run a cost program and we'll get procurement in to beat up the suppliers, and actually that's not necessarily where the value of procurement lies. It's one tool in the armor, and it's from time to time there's cycles and the rest of it that you need to get into that. But I definitely see that. Do you think that the process side is that something you feel? I don't know. Is that coming from a bit from the public sector, or do you think it's just trying to the lean thing and trying to put processes around things, or because I guess the concern with that process orientation is ultimately you can automate a process fairly easily, and then suddenly procurement doesn't exist anymore. So I
think we'll get onto that, won't we?
Yeah.
So I think it was one of your questions you're going to ask me about where procurement goes next.
Yeah.
I have sort of various theories about why we became so process orientated. I think there was a tendency as the function grew to search for leaders from outside the function to come and run it, understandably, because there weren't that many sort of big leaders in procurement in the relatively early days. We were still building as a function. Yeah. And some of those leaders probably came at it with a comfort by seeing a process they could understand and follow, given they hadn't been in the function. And so they were bought into, understandably, some of the processes sold by the major consultancies. Yeah. And those processes were good. They're not bad at all. But it became the way it became a tick box exercise became difficult. Yeah. So instead of being guides, it became thou shalt follow this process and thou shalt get the template done. And on occasions I've seen the sort of seemingly filling the template being more important than the ultimate result, or how the supplier's reacting, or how the stakeholder's feeling. Yeah. So I can understand why it happened. I think there was probably a moment in time where it was probably good. Yeah. But it's too tempting when you go in as a CPO now, and I'm absolutely been guilty of this, to take a look at the process first and go, oh, I don't recognise this process, and get hung up on that, rather than think about the skills and capabilities and culture you have in the organisation that you've got, and then build a high light touch process around those. Yeah.
So where do you think we should be focusing to get the most for the profession and for our organisations?
Well, for me, I think the biggest thing that I think we should focus on most right now is talent attraction and development.
Yeah, totally.
I think, in those terms, I think we should really focus strong and hard on core commercial skills. I've been really surprised in every role I've been in, or certainly more recently been in, about the lack of development and training that really good people haven't had. Yeah. So they're unable to play back what I'd call some core commercial fundamentals. Yeah. Particularly things like negotiation skills. Yeah. But also when you then take them down a path of, okay, so how do you run a supplier account plan, or how do you manage the supplier properly? Those things are missing as well. So it's really interesting to me that those core commercial skills aren't there. And so that's a big focus for me. I think the second thing is really pushing the variety of the function and making sure people do move around. There is a bit of a tendency to stick in a category. And I get the benefit of going deep, but I also think the ability to understand what's being done in other categories and broaden your mindset is an important factor. And those who've worked for me will have got bored of me saying that and trying to push people around a bit into different categories. And I guess the final bit for me is another hot button of mine, which is I think we've focused heavily on business partnering. I understand that, and we need to ensure that our people are good at business partnering and are credible with stakeholders, don't become slaves, but are able to work very closely with the stakeholders. And it's clearly not the case in all companies. But we seem to have lost that ability or that interest in doing that with suppliers. Right. So the other thing I would really focus on is trying to drive procurement functions to get out from behind the desk, to get away from the laptop, and to get out in front of suppliers, meeting suppliers, seeing where they are, meeting the key people, building those relationships, and working through that path, if you like.
You mentioned the development and lack of development there. Is it just because it gets stripped out of budgets and people aren't investing? That's one of the concerns that we've seen quite a lot is that procurement teams just don't seem to be investing in the right areas in tech and in training and all that sort of things. Things that can really drive the function forward. Is that what you've seen? Do you think? Or
yeah, I to be fair, on the organisations I've worked in, particularly an SNJLP, there was there was a willingness to support that side of things.
You've got to fight for it as well, haven't you? I suppose as a CPO, you've got to say, right, I need this.
Because understandably, if you're working in a finance organisation, the CFO quite understandably has a set of things a finance department must do, and she can't possibly have individuals who don't understand those core things about reporting, audit, and the likes. And so, as a CPO, you do have to, fight for those development skills that some might think people should have automatically, negotiation skills, for example. And also, this is where the template piece doesn't help, because there might be a mindset that actually you just have to follow those 7 steps, it becomes very easy. I mean, SIPs and the qualification pieces clearly helps to be able to call it out there, but clearly it doesn't sit there. It's the same as a management accountancy qualification. No. But I think yes, there's been it's probably too easy or easier to strip the cost from development from procurement function than some of the other functions. I think as a CPO and I've been guilty of this, we've been not strong enough at building up the sort of graduate schemes that I was fortunate enough to go on. And there were lots of them about when I joined, and I feel that BA1 was really good, but I know there were a number of those. And I know there are organisations that do still do that, but it's not easy when you come out of university to find yourself into a procurement function. It's not. It's not flashing at you. There's not a clear graduate scheme that is, or many graduate schemes that are obvious. No,
I think a lot of people, when you talk to a lot of people, they've fallen into procurement, and we still sort of rely on people falling into procurement for the next stage of the. I mean, there are a few more. You hear people more now coming through, and they've done a degree in supply chain or logistics or procurement or whatever. But that's it. Still seems to be fairly rare.
Yeah, I mean, I look at the grad scheme. I came on, and we all went through the grad scheme. I lasted in BA 16 years. There was only 4 of us. The other individual is a very senior exec in British Airways right now, and sort of came through procurement, but didn't stay in procurement. And the other person went on and did great work in consultancies and charities. Another one's gone into data analysis and the other side of the world. So, but the brilliant thing about that was that the grad scheme gave all 4 of us a core understanding in the airline, and a core understanding in the commercial skills, a qualification that went with it, and irrespective of whether we stayed in procurement or not, we all had a fondness of procurement, and we'll talk about procurement.
What's the most important thing you've learned in your career?
That's interesting. Well, I'll talk about most recent things I've learned. I think the thing that COVID has taught us, and all the difficulties that brought, and some of the challenges of Brexit and the like, whether you believe in it or not, is the ability and need to be agile. From a personal perspective, and also from what you do with the organisation. So I think that's one of the key things, and alongside that, resilience. We know it's tough times. We know organisations can be quite tough for procurement functions and for individuals, and to understand sometimes decisions made are not about you as an individual, but about some other part of the organisation or the way it wants to go, and it might not be the way you want to go. So agility coupled with resilience are the 2 core things I think I've learned, and those sound quite twee and not broad procurement stuff. But I think I've always said that the biggest mistake you can make as a CPO or going in a senior leadership position in procurement is to assume you can apply what you did in the last one. And so the agility is absolutely core there, because every time you walk in, you've got to adapt the procurement organisation to fit the culture that you've walked into.
Every organisation is different, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe if you're in some of the core functions such as finance, or if you're in engineering, there are some core fundamentals that pretty much stay the same and that you have to do, as I alluded to before. But the requirement and maturity of procurement, the requirement the organisation expects of procurement, can be fundamentally different. And the culture the organisation wants to portray into the external market can be entirely different. And an individual senior leader's interest in procurement can be entirely different. We've all had it. You've had the leader that both you and I work with who wanted to do every deal himself, and you had to sort of play to that ego quite hard, to the person who really wanted to be involved in procurement, but almost to the detriment of procurement,
Yeah.
to the leader you were working with who actually didn't even want to open the door to you.
Yeah.
So that's the range of what you see in
Yeah,
procurement, and that's fascinating. But also, again, you need to be very agile and you need to be very resilient.
Yeah. And actually, so I posted about soft skills a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, and in the comments, I think agility and resilience came up as key core soft skills.
Yeah, I think so. Whatever that means to you, because you know, we all know there's a whole lot of stuff around mental health and the likes at the moment, and that's absolutely core and to everybody's well-being. I think in procurement, if you've got to really be able to not take things personally, be able to be agile, be able to be resilient, and this is where the relationship management bit for me is I guess we're getting a bit soft and fluffy here, if you don't mind me saying, but the relationship management bit is quite important, because I think it can be quite a lonely function if you don't build those relationships and if you just follow templates and guides. But if you can get out and truly build proper relationships both with your stakeholders and, as importantly, with external parties, then that is a better place to be.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I see the role of procurement as brings together the internal stakeholders and has good relationships across those and knows who to bring in at what points, and then externally in the market as well, building up good relationships with some key suppliers in the market, because that can help to speed things up, because as you say, agility is key, speed to market is key, so having those relationships really important for procurement.
Yeah, I used to, it's interesting, when I was at BA, after I sort of got my sort of basic experience done, I remember particularly I was working with seat suppliers, and I used to spend a lot of time crossing the Atlantic to go and spend time with the seat supplier and work very closely with them, built very strong relationships with them. And I used to find that I felt that I was their account manager back in BA on occasions.
Yeah.
I'd find myself sort of fronting up to our engineers about why the supplier couldn't do certain things.
You become a bit of an advocate, don't you?
You found yourself sort of, fighting BA's cause when you were with them and fighting their cause when you were back in BA. And that, if I reflect on my career, it's been the times when I've been doing that actually the role's most fun and most interesting, and the relationships are very important. And I think one of the things you can find as a CPO, and I've certainly been very guilty of this, is you allow other pressures to mean that you push yourself away from doing that. You push yourself away from carrying on building those relationships with suppliers, because you've got yourself into a leadership thing. You're thinking about the team and politics and stakeholders. And I guess on reflection, I sort of often think, that's the bit I'm personally enjoy most, probably the bit I'm best at. And it's ironic that you end up doing less of it as you go through the organisation if you're not careful.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned leadership there, so we should probably talk about leadership. And before we do, I guess, we work together at M&S, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to say I appreciate your leadership and mentorship over the years, and it's made a big difference to me in my career. And I just want to say thank you, because we don't always get a chance to sit down and say thank you for things that have happened over the years, really.
Oh, I'm blushing now. No, I appreciate that, and it's nice to get that, because you're sort of right. We don't say thanks enough to each other. We don't say that to our colleagues. We can be quite hard on each other.
Yeah.
I think thanks for that, Richard, because I think if people could take a leaf out of that book, and I think one of the things that when you're a leader, and we'll get onto leadership in a minute, is you can end up getting it from both ends if you're not careful.
Yeah, totally.
You're sort of getting beaten up for not
delivering
the middle results,
there.
and your teams don't necessarily recognise you're getting that. I have to say the BA team, when I was in the BA team, that we moved on from that.
Yeah.
I always felt that people were both giving me a hard time if they needed to, taking the mickey out of me and my purple jumper if they needed to.
You got one on today as well.
No, it's not. It's just more maroon. And but also at the same time were genuinely thanking and recognising when their careers and development were going in the right direction. So now I think if you can get to the right place on that, it is very helpful.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, you built a good team at M&S. I guess what's your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this. There's sort of 4 or 5 things, and I think you also have to come back to what I said before. You've got to be a bit careful not to be a one-trick pony, if you like.
Yeah.
You've got to flex that philosophy a little bit, and on reflection, I haven't always done that. But I sort of come back to probably 5 things that I think, there's the given stuff about, being a procurement expert, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. A bit dull, really, but you've got to have those sort of things. But from a leadership philosophy, I'd say things I was trying to espouse and have sort of got heavily into my psyche, if you like. Firstly, time sovereignty. So time sovereignty for me is about making sure the members of your team are in charge of their own time. I don't personally espouse or believe the sort of clock watching, ensuring people in certain places all the time ever works. And I've read numerous books and stuff around it. That you only ever read the books that back up your theories, don't you? But I've often picked up on that theory coming through quite loud and clear when I've read stuff, and when I've applied it, it seemed to work really well. So it's a bit twee now even talking about flexible working given what we've been through, but the ability to give people their time and to recognise that people have other things in their lives other than work. I've always found that if you do that, people actually give you more. Not necessarily time-wise, but in terms of what they deliver.
I think culturally, we've definitely gone much further in that direction than even at the beginning of my career. It's only sort of 20 years ago or so, but the whole micromanagement thing has really had its day, I think. Yeah.
Now, against that, and the thing I'm constantly scratching my head about is the office culture versus non-office culture, and what you get out of being in an office and not. But I think the second thing that I always try and do and want to do is create a great culture, whatever that means. And it has to be a great culture within the organisation you're in. And for me, that's a set of folks that really get on together, can have a laugh, but are able to go serious as well, can deliver a lot and support each other, happy to get rid of their egos for the sake of the good of the team, if you like. So that's a key part of what I've always tried to think about. And aligned to that, and as part of that is a focus on development. I sort of always firmly believe that if you create the environment and ideally the funding for development to happen, results will come. And so actually you almost don't have to worry about the results if you develop people properly. They will just deliver, and if you give them their time as well, they will absolutely deliver. So a real desire to focus on development is the other part of me. We talked about it a number of times already. Relationship focused. When I've done my best work, it's been when I've built strong relationships and have built that both externally and internally. And the fifth thing, and very important to me, is I think you hopefully would agree, Rich, is having fun. We spend a lot of time at work, and if you're miserable when you come in, or you can't enjoy it, or the fun isn't the right sort of fun, i.e., clearly we've got a lot of focus on this now, making sure people are appropriate and the rest of it. But the right sort of fun that works in that culture, team developing, and people feeling they genuinely aren't being managed by the clock, but are managed by what they achieve. And what they achieve is succeeds. What they succeed is what's really measured. Those are the things I try and espouse.
What skills do we need for the future of procurement?
I sort of come back to I really, and it sounds a bit Billy Basic, but I think there's a real need to ensure folks have core commercial skills. If we don't have those core commercial skills, then what's the point? What's the point of procurement? I mean, and I think you alluded to before, the function could disappear if we're all just very good at following process. Because it's repeatable. AI will come in. There's companies like Globality doing some really interesting stuff that will, allow a lot of what I call the menial transactional procurement side of things to disappear. So we then have to have really strong core commercial skills, really strong negotiation skills, really strong contractual skills. Then the other bit for me is so important is being relationship builders. So, and we talked about that a minute ago in terms of being that, glue between the external supply base and your organisation, and being able to be positive with both sides and drive positive things forward. So for me, I think those are the two things. I mean, there's obviously a huge amount of, need to be strong technically. I from a technical IT perspective, and use tools and systems and stuff to the best. But I also think those naturally come. Those will flow. But if we haven't got the core skills right and the relationship building skills, then for me, those are things that are dangerous to the function.
Okay. And how do you define success?
For me or a function?
For the function.
I think when you come back to it, it's again, you've got to manage or measure success based on the organisation you're in.
Yeah.
So you've got to adapt that. But all things being equal, it's about stakeholder delight and feedback, and finding ways of measuring that, whether that be analytical or not. It's about suppliers, your core and key suppliers, you getting to a customer of choice position with them.
Yeah.
So if you can say your core suppliers are bringing you stuff that they're not bringing to everybody else, or bringing stuff to you first because they trust you and they'll support you. And also when times are bad, and this certainly happened in BA during the likes of 9/11, your suppliers are willing to support you in a way they might not support the rest of the industry.
Yeah.
That you've got a team that's really developing and developed. And for me, success is that team moving on up the scale, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
I've never had a problem, I hope you back me on this, Rich, with people leaving my team to go external. If it's for a bigger job, whether better rewarded or not, but if it's genuinely a bigger job, I've always been slightly disappointed, and fortunately it's happened relatively few times when someone just leaves for something similar. So I think that's a key part of success for me. And the other part of success, which links to the early part of what I said, was creating, through that culture you've created, there being a genuine ease of retention and ease of recruitment. People want to stay whilst you're developing them, and getting people into your organisation is easy because they've heard about you. So for me, I think those are the four elements of success. You'll notice I didn't say savings. For me, those procurement deliverables should be given. Right?
Sort of hygiene factors.
And if the stakeholders not delighted by what you're doing, then ergo you're not probably not delivering commercial benefit they want and need.
I definitely back you on that. The point around making sure people are developing and potentially going on to different, better things if they can. And I think you look back at the team at M&S, and actually the amount of procurement leaders and heads of procurement and the rest of it that have come out of that team that we had, going back probably 10 years or so. There's, I don't know, it's 5-10 big procurement leaders from that group now, isn't there?
I feel like they're going one direction, I'm going the other. They've passed me on the stairway. It's quite funny to watch.
How do you think we can better focus our effort on the most valuable activity?
You'll know what I think of this one, Rich. It's just about prioritisation. I think in every role I've found myself in, the biggest challenge with your own team is to find a way of supporting them to stop doing the lower level non-value add stuff. Because people understandably, want to have something they can go back to their desk just to do. And then those things build into the things that take time, that mean you're not focusing on the bigger stuff. So for me, it's about really prioritizing, where your energies and focuses are. In MS we set a very high bar for when we got involved. So you've got to create the tools and support structures and the development for those who are having to pick those pieces up or those other elements up. But certainly in M&S, that allowed us to reach into areas, things like pensions and franchises, that otherwise we'd never have got into. And I've certainly found in some of my other roles that it's been very difficult to drag folks out of the lower level stuff, and by extension we haven't really got as high up the chain as certainly we did at M&S.
Okay, and I've sort of heard differing opinions on this, but there is a view that actually some procurement people will just like doing simple stuff, because it's easy and it's quite comfortable, and some of the more strategic stuff is challenging, and it can be difficult to do. So I mean, have you seen that much, or is that down to the individuals, I suppose?
I don't think it's fair to say some of the lower level, if that's the right word, stuff is easier or simpler. I mean, because that can be quite the frustration, because if it's easy and simple, you could just say, carry on, just tick that one off and move on. But folks get caught up in the stuff because, everything is important to somebody. You find yourself, reacting to a stakeholder who thinks their thing is the biggest thing ever, when actually if you were able to prioritise properly, you'd say, look, I can give you a couple of words on that and how some support and advice, but I've got to get onto the big stuff. So I don't think it's so much because people gravitate to the simple or easy. I think it's people like doing stuff and being busy. And sometimes when you're working on the bigger strategic projects and the more value-added stuff, there are periods where you're not doing stuff and you're not busy, or it might feel like that because there's thinking time and there's planning time. And you and I have delivered multiple negotiation courses together, and one of the core things we talk about is taking the time to plan. 80% of the time should be on your planning, right? We both know that that's virtually never the case. No. So because people like being active and they don't consider that sort of planning time as being active. So I think it's more that. I think people, it's not that people are lazy or go to the easy stuff or anything like that. I think it's more that people actually almost the opposite. They feel like I've got to be active however many hours a day I feel I'm supposed to be working with this organisation. It's difficult when you come back to the desk and you haven't got 27 things to do. If you've got one thing to do and you can do that in half an hour, then have a coffee and think about it and come back to it, that might not feel as like you're being so active.
I mean, do you feel that there is more activity in procurement now than there was, say, 5 years ago, and whether that be from COVID, supply chain issues, or maybe just the visibility of procurement going up? Is there actually more to get through now, or? I
don't think so.
No,
I don't. Okay. I don't see why there would be necessarily. I mean, on one hand, there are in some organisations there's more recognition. In other organisations, there's not. Again, it comes back to different places. I've been in organisations where, the relationship with, for example, the legal function is very positive, and the legal function are totally expecting procurement to do the full remit of a procurement role, including getting the contract in place. I've been in other places where actually the procurement do quite a defined little bit. Now, in both those cases, procurement was equally busy. It's just how much of those bits you do. And if I roll back to my early stages of my career, and I come back to what I was doing in the early stages of my career and the breadth of what I was doing before, and the focus on the full breadth of the procurement role, not just doing the tactical sourcing bit, in a way that was a busier, more fulfilling role, because you were very, very close to the suppliers and doing a lot more supplier management and doing the sourcing and the contracting piece.
What do you think the future holds for procurement?
Well, I'm going to be really positive. I think we can, rather than go, it's the end of the world if we're not careful. I think some of the AI tools that come along will, for someone like me at least, make the areas of procurement that I find least interesting, they'll go away, right? So, much of the sort of repetitive, transactional, template-based work, that can just be done, right? I mean, that should be straightforward. The bits that will leave procurement to do, and it'll be challenging for some people because it will feel uncomfortable, let's call it, as it is, will be the much stronger, high-end commercial stuff. And being a really true commercial friend and critical friend to stakeholders. And also getting back into that glue we've talked about between the external market and the internal stakeholder. So proper supply-based management and proper supply management. it won't be so. It's easy is the wrong word. It won't be so tempting to roll back into what I call straightforward sourcing activity.
Yeah.
If that sourcing activity, everyone knows, involves just ticking a button.
Yeah.
You know, you won't really be able to focus on that.
No.
So I think that will make procurement a very exciting place
Mm.
and take us in a direction where we are truly focused on proper supplier management, supply-based management, the really high-end deals.
Mm.
And if you think about it another way, Rich, you know, it could mean that allows procurement to step up not just into those broader functional areas I've just talked about, but also into some of the more interesting commercial deals. We've all been in places where, you know, procurement's left doing the sort of the supplier deal, and there's something really interesting commercially going on, and you're sitting there going, why on earth, you know, they know that we're strong at those commercial elements.
Yeah.
Why weren't we brought into that? You know, why have they gone and done that deal with whoever, and maybe a corporate deal of some sort, and not involve procurement's negotiation skills or our relationship building skills or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm going to be positive. I think it's you know, people will have to develop really strong core commercial skills, because if they won't, those things will just happen.
Yeah.
They'll have to develop really strong relationship skills, because again, if they don't do those, then what's the point? And that will make the function really exciting and interesting, and maybe less of a tick box exercise than it can become in some places.
Brilliant. What's your biggest mistake, and what did you learn?
I've made so many mistakes, you know, and so you're constantly learning all the time. I think I espouse trying to make sure that you adapt procurement to the organisation you're in. And on reflection, I haven't always done that. And I've possibly I haven't got a sort of toolbox, but I've sort of brought along some toolboxy type thinking and let some fundamental things that I hadn't really noticed go. And that has either not, you know, meant that procurement has been as effective, or I've been as effective, particularly with the stakeholder side of things, that I could otherwise have been.
Yeah.
You know, we in M&S, I was fortunate enough to have a team that kept me on my toes and kept pushing me in the right direction and kept challenging me to not allow that to happen, and that was great. You know, but I think my biggest mistakes have always related to not really doing some of the things I actually espouse around adapting procurement and really focusing on the relationship with stakeholders.
Yeah.
And those then have led to, you know, the organisation not being as effective, or myself being as effective as I possibly could be. And it's interesting because I like to think I'm a relationship builder, and I think I am, right? So when I reflect, I'm not sure why that has happened on occasions, but I think you just as a CPO type get caught up in you know, team stuff, you know, reporting, you know, procurement language, let's call it. And so, you know, I think my sort of future career, I'm going to sort of really try and hone down on that and make sure I don't get caught up in that again. Yeah.
I think that's, you know, there's obviously lots of priorities you've got to be dealing with, and sometimes some of those things can slip, can't they? But actually that is a core element of what we need to do. Yeah. Which book changed your thinking about procurement?
I got two books that I think are changed my thinking, or more made me think differently, more broadly, right? So one is a book by Chris Voss, which is called Never Split the Difference, right?
Yeah, that's a good book.
You know, there's a very big tendency, isn't there, when you've sort of done various hard-end negotiation courses, to think of it that way. And the Chris Voss book, and Chris Voss was you know, FBI negotiator for many years, challenges a lot of that thinking, and challenges, let's call it the hard, arrogant approach to negotiation, and actually focuses heavily on things like mimicking, you know, and the importance of forming a relationship with the person
yeah.
you're negotiating with, rather than just being very transactional about it. So I think that book is brilliant, actually, because I think there is a tendency in the function to be quite transactional about how we negotiate, and demand stuff and not empathise or think about the other side of the table at all. And the other book, which you'll remember, is the one. I think it's called The 4 Hours Working Week, which is written by a guy called Tim Ferriss, who I'm not sure if I'd like to meet him or not. It sounds quite interesting.
I think he is. Yeah.
But his book is the title sounds a bit facile, but actually what he espoused was the fact that you can really if you really focus on priorities, you can get a heck of a lot done very quickly. And he sounded like to me like he sounds like the ultimate outsourcer, in the sense that he takes anything that someone else could do and do as well, if not better than him, gets them to do it. Whilst he focuses on what he can really be best at. And it really struck a chord with me in terms of, again, back to that thing we talked about, and not managing people's time, but managing their, measuring what they deliver, rather than all worrying about how many hours. Because at the end of the day, if they deliver a huge amount, that's brilliant.
Because that's all about leverage. Maybe the sort of traditional view in procurement would be, well, you have to work hard, and that's how you do well in procurement. But actually, there is a thing about you work smart, you leverage tools, you leverage your relationships, you leverage all this stuff, and actually you get more done.
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's the extreme end of it, isn't it? But the point that was interesting was that that actually this guy was at least claimed to be able to do a core job in those times, and then anything else he put into was massively. He was just adding massive value. So comes back to what I was talking about before about heavy prioritised focus. That's the way to go.
What important truth about procurement do very few people agree with you on?
Oh, that's a really good one. People claim to agree with it, but I don't see evidence of people agreeing with it. Really.
Say one thing, but do another.
So the absolute focus on savings. I think I can honestly say I've been sort of talking about this for a number of years and a number of conferences and the likes, and saying I just does my head in why we have allowed ourselves to be measured that way. It's our fault, we pushed it, and we have this really bizarre scenario, and I'm sure it's not true in every organisation, but where we report savings to a CFO or finance, they don't believe them. And you go round and round in this almost like catch-22 debate. And the more you try and report them and justify them, the more you get caught up in proving them. And actually, I think we've just talked about so many of the benefits that procurement should and can bring don't relate to savings. They relate to cost, clearly, and they relate to benefits in the organisation. But there's so many other things relating to ESG, sustainability, that's so more useful for the organisation, also useful for the planet, to be honest. So that's one of the things that I think people go, oh yes, we agree with you, Roger, but I think we're all guilty, and I'm guilty of it as well, but I think people are all guilty of the first thing they do is start producing a chart showing the savings that procurement have delivered. So I think that's probably one. I think the other one I don't think people disagree with me, but again, you don't see evidence of it happening, is a genuine try to move to SRM and supply relationship management stuff. I don't see that happening. I'd love to see, and maybe I'll try it one day. The CPO goes into a new organisation. The first thing he introduces is supplier management, not sourcing. And maybe I'm just mad thinking that way, but that for me is another area that I'm not quite sure I'm totally in track with.
I think last year I spoke to a lot of people, and they said that one of their priorities was SRM. But as you say, I don't know whether that's actually.
You said that over the last 20 years.
You've
asked that question. The two things people always say is our priority is talent, and our priority is moving to supplier relationship management. Right. And then what does everyone do?
Make no progress.
And I'm not saying I didn't, right, or don't. They get back into doing deals and reporting on savings.
Totally. And the savings point you made, actually, one of the other worst things that happens is if people do believe the savings and then they just want them stripped out of the budget, and then suddenly you've got difficult stakeholder conversations where you're sort of going to them and saying, it doesn't help with that relationship, does it? When you're
No.
sort of arguing about money coming, because stakeholders like to keep hold of their budget, don't they? Don't like it being taken away from them.
Well, it's right. There's one other thing that's a bit controversial that I think people disagree with me on. I think I've said this a few times as well, is this desire to get your spend analytics absolutely right and totally right, for me is almost you're chasing like the what do they call it, the Monty Python thing, the Holy Grail, right? And it's not going to be there.
No.
And I've always said, if your spend analytics is directional and can give you a good idea of what's going on, it's still going to be a lot better than probably is held in the rest of the organisation.
Yeah.
And I've seen it everywhere I've been. A desire to get it, and worrying about whether the pounds are exactly right. Whereas actually the story is almost what's more important, and being able to bring that together into so that now clearly it's got to be right enough.
Yeah.
But I think there's often a chase to get spend absolutely perfect before you do anything with it, and I think I fundamentally disagree with that. And I'm a maths graduate, right? So I'm allowed to be a bit.
Well, I think as well the cleanliness of the data in most organisations is extremely challenging, and we're not actually doing much to resolve that. So actually, I think everyone's just thinking AI will solve this at some point, and then we won't have to worry about it. But I think you're right. You don't need to.
Doesn't need to be absolutely
no.
I mean, it needs to be good enough, but it's directional. This is the most important. That's my view.
I think we sort of moved away from that category approach in some areas as well, haven't we? You don't really need to classify things by the UN classification on.
No, it works some places really well, and doesn't work in other places
no.
At all, actually. But yeah.
So, Roger, you've been in procurement for 30 odd years. How much improvement have you seen in the function over that time?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the difficulties is in doing that is you quite often look back with rose-tinted spectacles on what you previously experienced. But I sometimes struggle to think that procurement's moved on very much. I reflect on the great grad scheme I was fortunate enough to be on, and the training I had, and the willingness to get procurement and me involved in some pretty major things, so all over the place at BA. The focus on an equal focus between sourcing and supplier management, and genuinely building relationships and understanding that was absolutely needed to happen, and the empowerment I had as someone who owned my area. And I'm not sure that we've moved that on very much.
No.
I mean, clearly we went through the heavy processing phase, and I'm sure that's brought a number of benefits relating to repeatability and folks being able to pick up stuff that wasn't easy before. But at the same time, I sometimes wonder if it's dumbed down the function a bit on occasions.
Yeah.
So I was talking with someone else about this, and we couldn't really come to a straight answer as to whether we think procurement's moved on that much. It doesn't feel like there's been a lot of movement in procurement theory. No.
And
I was talking to this individual, and we were going, well, the stuff that we talked about back in the day, and the books we read, and the SIPS course we went on, how much has changed?
Yeah.
And so in a digital age and the rest of it, it's interesting that doesn't feel like that's moved on as much as one might expect.
No.
Now, I think there's loads of things coming around the corner with AI, particularly, that will challenge us. We've talked about that, but at the moment, it's quite difficult to go. The procurement theory has changed radically over the last 20 years, and the procurement approaches have changed radically.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in digitisation. A lot of these e-sourcing tools that are out there, they're digitising the process of the 1990s and making small incremental changes on those processes. So yeah, there's definitely a gap from that point of view. But yeah, I think you're right. There needs to be a bigger change, and that will drive the profession forward. I think as you say, there was a lot of thinking. There's a lot of we still quote a lot of the from the 80s, the sort of the thinking and the academic papers from there, and there's not been so much since. A lot I see more now. It's more influencers on LinkedIn, and I don't know whether it's just the sort of the era that we're in now of sort of social media, and that seems to be how some of these sort of the education happens is through social media rather than through professional bodies and exams and academic studies and the rest of it.
It's great to see those things coming through on LinkedIn and the tips you see and folks sort of raising their top 10 tips for procurement and the rest of it, and it's great, but none of it's particularly new.
No.
So it's great from a learning perspective and a reminder perspective as well. But I do wonder if that then there needs to be quite a step change in where procurement goes, and come back to what I talked about before about some of it's back to basics, which is the commercial skills, and some of it is really grabbing that territory around supplier relationship management and really working out, the sourcing piece is the easy part of the game. And that is very repeatable. The difficult part of the game is keeping those suppliers happy and leveraging the relationship properly. So I wonder if the procurement step and the procurement theory, that the next procurement theory needs to be all around that.
Well, Rog, great to talk.
Fabulous to talk.
If people are looking to get hold of you, what's the best way to get in touch?
Oh, I come down to Brighton. I'm sort of hanging out on the beach all the time. No, I think I'm on LinkedIn. Please reach out if you want to sort of chat to me or anything. I'm sort of think I'm quite a chatty bloke, so I'm quite happy to spend time with people. I'm always keen to sort of help folks with their development and the rest of it as well. And also just to compare notes and theories. So if you disagree heavily with what Rich and I have talked about, then very happy to have a debate as well.
Brilliant. Well, great to have you on. Talk to you later. Cheers.